I'm not doing both of these things, but I'm really thankful that he's getting a chance to be at a wedding with some friends this week, and then he'll be back. And he's preaching next week. So I hope you'll come back and encourage him and be encouraged by him. And then on the 4th of January, we'll have a service to install our elders that we appointed here recently. And then we'll get back to Genesis after that. So I promise we haven't left Genesis without, we'll get back there. I do hope you're in the book of Matthew, though. I think that's in, 959, page 959, if you're using the Bible under the chairs. Also, we have a little bit of like a Hudson Avenue Community Church starter pack. Here it is. There's a shirt in the back, on the back row. Get one. They're yours. Merry Christmas. Also, if you haven't picked up one of these little red evangelism books, grab one of those as we find, follow, and share Jesus together. One of the scariest things to do is, sometimes, I don't know why it's so scary, to talk to your friends about Jesus, but really, here's a great step. Bring them with you to church, or to lunch after church, or both. Better yet, if you say church, then lunch. And bring some people with you. And also, there's stickers, because as long as we're getting shirts, we should have stickers. It's the whole thing. So shirts, stickers, books, and if you want a Bible, take one of those too. There you go. There's the full package. All right. Outline this morning is an old story with a new beginning, old bondage with a new exodus, and an old promise with a new baby. So you got an old story, old bondage, old promise with new beginnings, new exodus, and a new baby. I will confess, this will be a bit of a whirlwind. As I got into it, it's like, oh man, I just kept seeing stuff. So I hope this is, I think it'll be helpful. But what stories shape your lives? We are people who are shaped by stories. Every lit major knows that. Every person who has written a book believes that. Political commentators all believe that and know that. I think we all know it. We're people who are shaped by stories. It's why we name our children after people, because we want to identify them with their story in some way, shape, or form. Perhaps you named your son or daughter after your father or grandfather or grandmother or whatever. Or maybe it was a Bible character. That was done in order to connect them to something else in hopes that it would identify them in their present and shape their future. What stories shape your lives? What are you filling your mind with? If you look at the first 17 verses of Matthew 1, which we did not read this morning, or we read a few of them, but you're going to find a genealogy. And if you have learned one thing in our study of Genesis, it probably is that genealogies are an important part of Hebrew storytelling. Significant turns in the plot line of the Bible are often marked by carefully written genealogies. They're designed to connect the readers to the past, developments that have happened, and also to the promises that were made. Matthew understands Jesus to be the fulfillment of the promises that are millennia old. Jesus did not just parachute into the middle of history with no context. There's centuries and millennia of context that come to light and are fulfilled in Jesus. We're not going to go through this genealogy in detail this morning, although it did cross my mind. Other than to point out that Matthew understands this list of names to be a genealogy of expectation. It's not primarily designed to make you look back. It's designed to make you look at Jesus. He is the son who would fulfill the promises given to Abraham. he starts out, this is the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. He is the son who would fulfill the promises given to David. Matthew 1 begins with this line, an account of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. It literally reads in Greek, the book of Genesis of Jesus Christ, the son of Abraham. Now, that phrase, the book of Genesis, is how the Greek translation of the Old Testament, the Septuagint, the one that's quoted most often throughout the New Testament, translates those Toledot sections in Genesis that we've looked at. The Toledotes are the genealogies. These are the generations of. They work like knuckles in the book of Genesis to help tell the story of God's people and God's promise. And this is the way the Septuagint translated those sections. This is the book of the Genesis. Matthew isn't just putting Jesus forward as a wise teacher who's able to do some cool magic tricks. He's explicitly and relentlessly, from the very beginning, making the case that Jesus is the fulfillment of all the promises that God has made to his people. He's the eternal king, coming to rule the world, to bless the nations, to make all things new. Matthew is explicitly saying, from the beginning to the end, that the person at the end of this genealogy is the son promised to Abraham who would bless the nations. The person at the end of this genealogy is the son promised to David who would reign on the throne of God's people forever. Every line of this story is meant to recall to our minds stories and a promise and a set of expectations. Jesus is bringing a new Genesis, a new creation, a new Exodus, and all of the rest. We'll get into that in a second. Verse 17 that Trevor read for us a second ago. So all of the generations from Abraham to David were 14 generations. And from David to the deportation of Babylon were 14 generations. And from the deportation of Babylon to the Christ, 14 generations. The genealogy is divided into 3 sections that we see there. The age of the patriarchs to the judges, the age of the kings, and the age of the exile. The whole genealogy is bracketed with the expectation of the Christ. This is the genealogy of Jesus the Christ. This is to Christ 14 generations. Or Jesus was born, who is called Christ. It's like the sandwich. And in the middle of that sandwich is David. Now, I'm not going to get into this too much, but Matthew built this genealogy around 3 sets of 14 generations with David in the middle. And it's a literary device, kind of like a poem almost, that David's name has, in Hebrew, has numbers attached to it. And when you add them up, you get 14. And that's why he broke it up, so you have David in the middle. So anyway, it's not something like super mystical. It's just there to help the readers, the original readers, understand what the point of what he was talking about. This is the king that was promised. And Matthew brackets his whole gospel with an announcement of the king of the Jews. By arranging this genealogy around David's number, Matthew signals that Jesus is the promised Messiah and the legal heir to the throne and the ultimate deliverer. So there's his big idea. We've said it over and over and over again. He's making a very clear claim that all the promises of God are fulfilled in the person who is called Jesus, who is the Christ. But he's not just coming in that way. He's coming to do something. Jesus isn't just coming with a title. He's coming with a mission. He's coming to lead a new exodus. Matthew is not only making the statement of Jesus' kingly identity, he's going to be the king who's going to rule the world, but his gospel, or good news, is also written to tell a story of a new exodus. Look at verse 16. And Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom Jesus was born, who is called the Christ. So we have been in the middle of this story of Joseph in Genesis. That's where we left off from last week. Most of us probably think about Joseph as the story at the end of Genesis. But Joseph's story is actually the setup for the Exodus. It's setting up for the deliverance of God's people out of slavery in Egypt. And it's the main narrative of God's people. They're going to look back on this for centuries. Today, Passover is still celebrated by the Jewish people, looking back at when God brought them out of Egypt. And Joseph is the setup story for the Exodus. Exodus begins with a short genealogy of Jacob's sons, ending with the death of Joseph. And in the Hebrew Bible, the first words are, these are the names. Immediately following that list of names, we read this line in Exodus. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. Consider the fact that Matthew concludes the genealogy of Jesus with Jacob, the father of Joseph. Matthew introduces us to Joseph, Jesus' stepdad, who happens to have a dad named Jacob. We're supposed to see the parallels. The Joseph in Genesis, his dad was named Jacob, and then you have Jacob who has Joseph. He's characterized as being a faithful man, a just man, a sexually chaste man, and has a few dreams. And over the next chapter, we're going to meet a king whose name is Herod, who arose in Israel, who did not know the promises of God about the Messiah. And the irony that we're going to encounter in the next chapter of Matthew, if you keep reading, is really thick. He's showing how the promised land has become Egypt. That's what Matthew is doing. The land of bondage, the king of the Jews, Herod the Great, has no clue about the promises of God, and he seeks to exterminate the son of promise, the son of Joseph, commanding a genocide of baby boys that's in parallel with Pharaoh's genocide in Exodus, the beginning of Exodus. And to make his point, Joseph takes the promised Messiah, Jesus, and his mother, and flees from Israel to Egypt. It's a reversal. Matthew sharpens the point even more when he quotes Hosea 11:1, and he says, "Out of Egypt I called my son." He says, Israel, you have become Egypt. You have become the bondage from which you fled. And the subsequent movements in Matthew's gospel parallel the Exodus, portraying Jesus as a Moses-like figure. That's why he goes down to the Jordan River and is baptized in the Jordan River. And then he calls 12 disciples. And then he ascends the mount and gives the law, making a parallel with Moses. We could go on and on about this. But in every way, Matthew is demonstrating that God in Christ has not only kept his promises to his people, he has also identified with them. And he is calling them out of their slavery to sin. And he's calling them out of death. The wages of sin is death. And he's calling them into perfect righteousness and resurrection life. He's calling them to follow the eternal King who has been enthroned in Zion. So that's where this story fits in Matthew. He's introducing us to the King who is coming, who has come, who has been promised, and who has come to establish his kingdom and be enthroned. And so, with that introduction and with that in mind, he says, verse 18, now the birth of Jesus Christ took place in this way. There's a new baby. There's a new Genesis and a new Exodus. And then he's like, there's a new baby. When his mother Mary had been betrothed to Joseph, before they came together, she was found to be with child from the Holy Spirit. Now, Matthew is demonstrating in the genealogy that we just read Jesus' legal right to the throne of David. And so he's telling the story of Jesus' birth from the perspective of Joseph, because he's his legal dad. Not biological, but legal. Because of his descent from David. So put yourself in Joseph's sandals for a minute, because that is what Matthew is intending us to do, is to see this from a different angle. Betrothal wasn't really engagement like we think about today. Joseph and Mary were legally married. But during that betrothal period, the wedding hadn't happened yet. There's a time between the times. They had not consummated their marriage, and they were not living together. This time was set aside to get everything ready. So a promise had been made, a commitment had been made, a covenant had been made, but it had not yet been consummated. And so Joseph was saving up his money, and he was working on the house late at night probably, getting ready for Mary to move in all of her stuff. And if Joseph were to die during this time, Mary would be considered a widow. And if they broke up after they were betrothed, they would have to legally file for divorce. So it's during this time of expectation and preparation that Joseph discovers that Mary is pregnant. And he knows that he's not the dad. It's difficult for us to grasp all of the social implications of this kind of discovery, but we can imagine some of them. This was a public scandal that would mark the rest of their lives, certainly. And think about her story.